Hello there and welcome back again. So in this video we are going to go through the Angular project structure and we will try to understand what are the different files present there and what is the significance of them. So I have just created a simple project using ng-new and you can see that I have my directory over here which has the name of my application, my app, and under that I will have all my code which is generated by Angular CLI. So before jumping to this, I would like to quickly show you one diagram in which it is shown that how Angular works and how the components, the technical components are interrelated and how is the design of Angular framework. So let me quickly show you that. So this is the Angular architecture. As you can see, I have a couple of elements of this architecture which are ng modules. I have components, I have templates. Then these arrows basically shows how they interact with each other, and there are some other technical concepts which are some specific to the Angular and some are in general in the web development. Okay, so for now, to as a beginner, I would say to have an understanding of this architecture, you need to understand what are the components and what does exactly component contains and what is the relationship between components and module and then what are the services and for what purpose they are being used. So in a nutshell, I will just keep it simple for now, and like in Angular application, we have multiple components. Components basically stands for the very smallest decomposable unit of your code or the decomposable feature or anything of your application, so that you can call as a component. And components belongs to your ng module. Then your ng module also needs to have the dependency so that it can fulfill through imports. It can provide the its components or the code block. It have maybe services or something else to the some another module through export. And this is the main thing here, the bootstrapping is the important process in the Angular, where what it does it tells your transpiler, tells your TypeScript compiler to which to follow the instruction on which file to pick and from where to start the execution of your code. So in Angular project we have the main.ts, which is basically the root module, what we have, where we define that what root module the application is using. So typically we call it app module. So we tell that to the main.ts that to bootstrap the app module and start the execution from this point. Okay, so second thing in the architecture, you need to understand that I was talking about the component. Your component basically consists of the three things here. Your component have view, your component have model, and it has a module also. So your components are declared under module, and it has a view. View is nothing but your template, your markup, your HTML that you are using, and the model stands for whatever the data that you have. You need to do the binding of your data to your view. So that's what being handled in the model. This is a little detailed diagram, I would say. In this, we have given the name of the platform browser. This is another module which comes along with Angular core, which handles the bootstrapping process. And there are other lot of dependencies you need to have before doing the actual bootstrap of your component. So that being handled by the this module, platform browser, which is part of your @Angular. And then it goes to a main.ts, and there is a script, and the app root is your root level selector, and after that it is being put into your index.html, and that's what being rendered into your client. Okay, so that's all. Now I will go through each of the files and I will start from the top to and we'll go to the bottom. So first you can see that I have .angular cache. So this is the .angular folder which contains the cache. So every time when you do an build, whenever you execute a build command, there is a artifacts that are generated, and what Angular does in order to improve the time required between doing the build and then serving, it does a cache operation. So all the cache files it puts under this directory, and it's up to you. You can configure this if you want to disable the cache. There is a very simple command that you can perform, that is ngconfig cli.cache.enable false. So what it will do, it will simply create one entry in your angular.json, and which will tell that CLI cache enable equals to false or true, whatever you provide. So yeah, so the purpose of this Angular cache is to just hold a cache. Then comes the .vs code. This is the VS Code. Since I'm using a VS Code as editor, that's why it has some configuration store for it, like which extension it should recommend me. In the launch.json, I have a couple of things here. This I will discuss when we'll come to the part where we can do an debugging on the Chrome. So when you have to do the debugging on the Chrome or any browser, you need to specify the configuration in the launch.json. Then you have the task.json, which is again for your TypeScript and the npm start related things. You don't need to bother about it. Even if you delete the .vs code, it doesn't affect your Angular project. Then comes your dist. In the dist, you have your output artifacts which are generated. This is the this folder contains the result of your build command. I will talk about individual files. Before that, I want to cover up this file. So then you have the node modules. Node modules is your all third-party libraries, all third-party modules that you have dependency in your application, all are put under your node modules. This is a typical for all your npm project, or I would say any JavaScript project. Then comes the important folder, which is source, src. In the src, you have the actual code for your Angular. And yeah, in the SRC, you can see you have the app. This is the first. By default, you get one component, which is app component. And as you can see, and I was talking about that your component have one view, it has a model, and it can also have the style file. So same structure is followed here, same files. You can see app dot component.html, which contains my markup, and it can also contain the CSS, but that's not a good practice since I just created this application and provided me a lot of boilerplate code. That's why you can see here, but we keep the CSS file separately. Then I have the component.ts, which contains my business logic and my logic for binding the properties and event to my views. Then I have the .spec.ts, which is basically my specification for my testings. So the test cases that I'm going to write in future, that will come under this specs.ts. Okay, then I have assets. In the assets, I can put my statics files, like I have the font files or some images or anything that I need, like if I'm using some the CDN JS, something like that, I can, or I have my custom JS, I can put it there. Then comes the environments. In the environments, you have two files, environment.prod and just environment.ts. So here you can provide your environment specific configuration. For example, if you have multiple environments for your application, like you have a QA, production, dev, and if you want to give an configuration specific to the environments configuration, like you have some API endpoint, or you have an different server for your QA, you have different server for the production, you want to use a different values, or you may want to give a different theme for your application. All those your application specific properties you can put in your environment.prod, and then you can export and use those values across your entire application. Then the favicon is just a file, as you are already aware. Then comes the index.html. This is the single file, as we know that Angular is a single page application. So we just have a index.html, a single file, and all your code which you write in the components will uh, come under your app root, and this is the root level selector, and everything that you have under your app module, all components will come under your app root. So you just provide one single selector, a single tag here in your index.html, and it will contain everything that you need. It will basically form your DOM tree starting from your output root. Then comes the main.ts. Main.ts is the first file when you do an build operation, or when you have to start the execution. This is the main file from where it start. So in the main ts, you can see it has a line number 11 and 12. These are important, where you can see that it is telling that platform browser dynamic uh, to bootstrap the module, which is app module. So basically it is telling that start to bootstrap the things, start to inject the things from starting from the app module, and through that the rendering basically will happen. If there is anything error in between that, this is the exception handling part over here. So yeah, and the polyfills.ts, you have, this is the file that we create because nowadays we have a lot of browsers, modern browsers, and they need to be compatible with the different versions of the JavaScript. So for that there is a zone.js library which comes, and that library basically handles the things which basically deals with if there is any compatibility issue happening for the mismatch between the version of the JavaScript, it will take care of that. Then comes the style.css. This is the, I would say, a global CSS file that you have. If you have some CSS styles that you want to put across all your application, it is good practice that you include them here. Then comes the test.ts. Here you can put your testing related things, like in this case it is what we are doing here. We are just simply telling that initialize the Angular testing environment. Few things are there, and we are also giving an instruction that all my testing files going to have an .spec and .ts, this kind of a pattern, so you need to include all those. So this is for your testing. When you will going to write the test cases, this is basically the entry point that it is going to check. Then there is a browser list src. This is a file which in which you can put an you can put in some configuration related to your browsers. You can see there is a command npx browser list that you can execute, and the purpose of this command is just to give a list of the browsers in which your Angular application will run flawlessly. This is basically this tested browser versions. It doesn't mean that your browser is not listed here and your application, your Angular application, is not going to run there. It just means that these are the browsers in which it is being tested. So yeah, this contains information about your browser. Then you have editor config, which is more of your editor that you are using, which indent style to use, how many spaces you want for your indent, then the character set, encoding, all those stuff. Then the gitignore is automatically generated by your Angular, and it contains the file that usually we don't want to commit to our repo. Then this is the important file angular.json, in which you can see there are a bunch of stuff we have which are important to understand. So you have a project in which I have my app, the name of my project. Then in the schematics, schematics is basically for your, when you execute your ng generate components, ng generate service, or ng generate directive. If you want to override that behavior, you can do that configuration through a schematics. The more detail you will find about in on Angular official documentation. So you can see there are a lot of things over here, like tsconfig, which tsconfig file to use for TS configuration. Then you have the styles file, which is here CSS1, and then you have development and the production. If you have to provide the configurations, like here in this case we have the configuration for like the bundle size that I'm generating. If it is uh, exceeding the size of 1 MB, then it will show me an error that this is too much of the size. So I can provide this kind of a configuration here. Then on the serve, what I need to do, so for the serve, as you can see, it's using a dev kit build Angular dev server. If you want to override that and use some different server, you can do that through this by tweaking this configuration over here. Yeah, then comes the karma.conf. So karma is a framework that is being used for your unit test case, for execution of your unit test cases. You use a Jasmine. This is a framework for writing the unit test cases, and you use a karma to run your unit test cases. So that related configuration you can provide here. As you can see, it is saying that frameworks being used as Jasmine here, which comes along with your Angular installation in the build Angular. Then comes the package.lock.json. Package.lock, this is the log file, which is basically only concerned about your development environment, where you are doing a development of the local setup. It just tells that these are the these are the npm modules that I have installed, and this must be of this version. But the important file is that your package.json, in which you have what all dependencies. Dependencies are nothing but your npm module, what all dependencies you need in order to build the application. And there is another dependency which are dev dependencies. So dev dependencies mean you need these npm packages only on your development machine. You don't need them on your server or wherever you are hosting it. For example, TypeScript I'm using to write the Angular application, but I don't need a TypeScript on the production server to run it. Jasmine I'm using just for the test cases writing. I don't need a Jasmine to run the test cases. Karma I'm using to run the test cases in the in the dev instance, but I don't need it to be there on the production. So like that, you can see I have dev dependencies list here, and these are the dependencies which you need to have in order to build your application successfully. README, I will not talk about it. tsconfig, so there is an important file here which is tsconfig.json, which contains the configuration for your TypeScript. So it tells that compiler option, what will be your output directory, then which version of your ECMAScript to use. So here we are using ES ECMAScripts 2020 version, and if any library TypeScript has a dependency on then what it is, so that you can provide in your lib. Then the Angular compiler option, you can also play around like strict templates and input access modifiers. So you can also provide the configuration related to your linting over here. Uh, you don't need to bother about it at this stage, but if you have to do and modification into it, I recommend you refer the Angular documentation. You will find useful content there. So your tsconfig.spec, this is more for your specification file that you have written in the TypeScript. So this extend, as you can see, this tsconfig.spec extends your tsconfig.json, and that's where you can you will have all the properties that are there in the tsconfig, and you will have additional new ones that are defined in the tsconfig.spec. Okay, now I will talk about the dist, and as you can see in the dist, I have some files already present there. So dist is the directory where your your distribution, it stands for the distribution, and it contains your result of your build. So whatever application you have, you are building it. So the content that you need, the files that you need in order to run it in the browser, this is all will be part of your dist. So I am going to type command ng build, and I want to give an configuration of production, and I don't want hash code attached to my output file, so I will set output hashing equals to none, and I will hit enter. So this will take some time, and the result of this ng build is that it generates an files into a dist folder. As you can see, it already started executing, and it has deleted the existing content of my dist. Now let's wait. So as you can see, it has compiled, and I can see in the dist I have the new files here. I have index.html, I have main.ts and the polyfills and the runtime. The flag that I passed here, which was output hashing equals to none, the purpose of it, it doesn't attach uh, the hash code to my generated files. It's just a main.js, polyfills.js and the runtime.js, all I get here, and one style.css. Okay, now if you run this application and if you see it in the browser, and if I go to the sources, you can see that in the sources I have these files generated. So you can see I have the index.html, I have main.js, polyfills, runtime, styles, and the vendor, and the yeah, style.css. So this tells that in order to my browser to understand what things to render in the browser, you just need to have this file. So this is the end result of your Angular compilation, I would say. And if you put this in any server, it doesn't matter. Here you are using Angular's built-in server, which is devkit HTTP. If you put it in any other framework, Express or Spring or any other, it doesn't matter. It is a language independent. It will run flawlessly there. Yeah, so that's all for this video, and I hope this may help you. Thank you.